All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the University of Michigan Sound Support's Parent Webinar Series. My name is David Clark. I'm the Sound Support Coordinator for the University of Michigan Hearing Rehabilitation Center. As many of you are aware, Sound Support is an outreach grant funded by the University of Michigan Department of Otolaryngology and Michigan Medicaid. The grant is designed to provide outreach and support to children with hearing loss throughout Michigan. We've put together this series of webinars as a response to several parent requests for additional information on hearing loss, speech and language development, and educational issues. We hope you'll find them to be helpful, and we encourage you to share topic ideas for future discussions with us on our evaluation, which will be sent out at the conclusion of today's webinar. We just strongly encourage your feedback and suggestions as we continue to prepare these for the future. You'll find presentation slides located on the Handouts tab located on the toolbar. You're able to download these or print them directly from your computer or device. There's also a questions tab. Please feel free. You'll be able to type in your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll address them at the end of today's talk. Today's webinar is Tips and Resources for Navigating the Educational System. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Anita Vera. Anita is an audiologist at the University of Michigan Health System Pediatric Audiology Department and Cochlear Implant Team. She provides educational audiology consultant services to Washtenaw Intermediate School District. Dr. Vera earned a bachelor's degree in deaf education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in audiology from Clarion University of Pennsylvania. She completed her PhD in educational studies with a focus in literacy, language, and culture from the University of Michigan. Her research interests include language and literacy development in children who are deaf and or hard of hearing. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Anita, and we will get things started.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you're able to join us today for our third and final parent webinar of the series for this summer. Today we're going to be talking about tips and resources for navigating the educational system. Again, this is just going to be a brief introductory, but we hope it will give you some information as we head back into the school year that will be helpful for you. So brief overview, we're going to just discuss the difference between various educational programming for children with hearing loss. We're going to discuss educational accommodations and recommendations for children with hearing loss, and provide and review some additional resources and websites that you might want to explore further. So just before we begin, things to consider is really, the first point is really establishing a team approach. I think it's really looking at building that connection between the educational, the medical, and the family, and kind of building that triangle together. But know that you are your child's best advocate, and that knowledge is power. So having you on the webinar today is great because you're trying to get some more information to be a better advocate. I think another thing that's really important is getting a release of information signed to share information between the medical and educational realm. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there are certain information between HIPAA laws and FERPA laws. HIPAA related to private health insurance and sharing that information, and then same thing as FERPA, which is in the educational realm of sharing information back and forth. So by getting a release of information signed, that allows professionals to share information to help build that team approach. It's really important to obtain copies of records and assessments that you can share with team members as well. And again, I encourage you to ask questions, as many professionals, myself included, tend to use lots of jargon. And at times you can feel like you're drowning in alphabet soup. As the little picture has there, it's like, help me, what's an IFSP, IEP, ABR, OAEs, SRTs? So hopefully as we go through today's lecture, some of those will be clarified, but I encourage you, again, to ask questions, because again, knowledge is power. So guiding legislation in regards to educational programming, and again, I'm really referring mostly here with the state of Michigan. I noticed there are some participants that are from outside states, so it may differ a little bit based on what your state special education law is. One difference is in Michigan, special education law goes birth to 26, where in most states it's birth to 21. The federal legislation looking at services for children with hearing loss typically looks at the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and you'll hear people talk about Part C and Part B. Part C relates to early intervention, and Part B is special education. And then you have the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So first, let's take a look at that early on or birth to 3 population, or Part C. In Michigan, they call it early on. In other states, it may have a different name. So who can refer for early on services? A parent can refer, child care providers, teachers, public health facilities, medical professionals, and other social service staff providers can make a referral. And how to make a referral? You can call the 1-800 number, you can do it online, you can fax, you can email. So the bottom of the slide is the contact information for reaching Michigan Early On, as well as the website. And then you'll notice that there's a referral tab when you go there to make that referral. Early On does have a referral timeline. From the time of the referral by the designated agency, which the referral typically goes to the local intermediate school district, a service coordinator must be appointed as soon as possible. And then a notice is sent to the family to request permission to evaluate the child, and that must be made within 10 calendar days. And then there's a complete evaluation and assessment, and then what happens at the end is the individual family service plan meeting is held, and again, there's the timelines related to that. In Michigan, you can qualify for both Part B and C services. Again, Part C is that early on birth to 3, but in Michigan, special education goes from birth to 26. So sometimes children with receiving services through early on are working with a early intervention specialist, but are also receiving supports from a teacher consultant of the deaf and hard of hearing, or a speech-language pathologist, and again, it depends on each child's unique needs. But again, it's encouraging to develop a team who is knowledgeable about working with children with hearing loss, who understands your child's unique needs, and is trained to provide that support. Again, with this IFSP plan, the focus is on the family and as well as the child. So the Individualized Family Service Plan, Individualized, it's written specifically for the unique needs of the child and the family. As we mentioned before, it's focused on the family and on the outcomes and changes that the family wants as a result of their child's and family's participation in early intervention. When it talks about the services, it's got to talk about who is going to providing them, where, when, how often, and what the services will be. And then the plan is the written documentation that can be changed as your child's and family's needs change. Also, there's a transition then as the child is approaching their 3rd birthday, where you'll work with the coordinators to look at what are the services available as the child begins to that 3 to 5 year period. Another resource that's available is Build Up Michigan. It's IDA funded, and that's another resource in the state of Michigan that can help obtaining educational support for that preschool 3 to 5 age group. And if you're unsure of what services are available, I encourage you to talk with your early on provider, or if you're not in early on, that you can work with the Build Up Michigan staff to get connected with the appropriate people to determine what preschool services and supports are available in your local community. As you move beyond looking at what are the processes in getting into an individualized education program or an IEP, again, this is a referral to evaluate for special ed services, Part B. How you get these services and how to get involved and connected would be to contact your local special ed director. The process does vary a little bit by county and by district. You can contact the local intermediate school district and ask to speak with the special ed director, or identify if there's a supervisor of the deaf and hard of hearing program or a teacher consultant of the deaf and hard of hearing to again evaluate and determine eligibility for special education. If your child is enrolled in a non-public school, attending a private school, there's a plan called a non-public school service plan. And again, I would talk with the principal or special ed director of the private school to determine how to get that set up and determine eligibility for your child. Michigan has special education referral timelines, again, similar to Part C as with Part B. You can access this on the Michigan Department of Education website. The school district must make reasonable efforts to obtain your informed consent for initial evaluation. And again, these guidelines give you all the information that you may need. So Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, also referred to as MARS, goes over these timelines. So you can, again, the link is listed at the bottom of the page for you to access this. Again, you go through the same situation with early on where your child is evaluated. It has to be through a multidisciplinary team. And then once the evaluation is completed, the team as well as the family, parents, meet to discuss eligibility and services. Some of the areas where it varies by county and school district is in the definition of hearing impairment and how it's interpreted. So the Michigan or the MARS rules have the term in it. A hearing impairment is a generic term which includes both students who are deaf and those who are hard of hearing, and refers to students with any type or degree of hearing loss that interferes with development or adversely affects educational performance. So it's not black or white. There is some gray there as how do people interpret adversely affects educational performance. Again, I would encourage you to discuss this with your team, and then what goes into further talking about the difference between deafness and hard of hearing students, which relates to the degree and type of hearing loss. So again, in Michigan, this is the definition they use for eligibility for hearing impairment. Other states like Colorado, they have a set criteria related to pure tone average of hearing loss, that a permanent unilateral hearing loss of at least 35 dB or qualifies, but in the state of Michigan, this is the definition used in determining eligibility. The determination of hearing impairment is based on the full and individual evaluation by, again, that multidisciplinary team, but also must include an evaluation from an audiologist and an otolaryngologist. So this is where a lot of times people of the team will ask, can we get a copy of their most recent audiogram or hearing test, and they need to have a report from the otolaryngologist or ear, nose, and throat doctor. So again, it's important to get that release of information so that you can share that information back and forth, because it is necessary for determining eligibility for special education under hearing impairment. So with the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, you're looking at providing a free, appropriate public education, or you'll hear people say FAPE. So it's to provide children who are eligible to receive education that's free, no cost to the child's parent or guardian, that it's appropriate, that specialized instruction to meet that child's unique needs, that is provided through the public school system, and that the education that they receive prepares them for further education, employment, and independent living. So if you have a child who doesn't necessarily need specialized instruction, at the end of the IEP, sometimes people will go through the IEP process and there's really not any specialized instruction that is needed, that it then may be considered to put in place a 504, which will be providing equal access to general education curriculum as they're typically developing peers to maximize that child's potential and outcomes. So the difference between the IEP and the 504 is the IEP is under IDEA, and again, that's special education, where the 504 falls under ADA, and it's about access, and it's usually under general education. So typically the coordinator was within the building that the child is enrolled. So if your child is looking at a 504 plan, you would want to start with the school principal. Again, it's a little bit situation dependent, because it might be where a child goes from being evaluated for an IEP, they don't meet the eligibility criteria, however, they still need some accommodations in order to access the curriculum similar to their typical hearing peers, that therefore a 504 is put into place. Sometimes a parent may already know that the child doesn't need any other specialized instruction, but they want to ensure that a 504 is in place, so they may go directly to the school building principal to figure out who the 504 coordinator is and get that into place. So typically you request an evaluation, you convene a team meeting, and then you write the plan of the 504, which is again looking at those accommodations that would help enable access to the general ed curriculum. So some things that you might put in a 504 plan include assistive technology such as a personal FM. Sometimes it might be strategic seating, visual supports. So again, it's more around the access versus specialized instruction. And again, I encourage you, I know it's kind of a little confusing, but if you have questions, please jot them down and we'll review those at the end of the webinar. Another topic that you hear a lot about in the educational realm is this issue of least restrictive environment, or LRE. And I like to think of it as a continuum of educational programs. So the goal is you want to provide the child with FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, and then you want it to look at in their least restrictive environment. So there's a continuum. It can go from where your child is completely in the general education classroom setting, fully mainstream, and they may just have some additional supports or education, to the other end, which may be a residential school for the deaf, which here in Michigan is the Michigan School for the Deaf. So you have from fully mainstream to a residential school for the deaf. But then there's those continuums in between where you might be part-time, your child might be part-time in general education with some resource room or academic support. Then there might be in a self-contained classroom with deaf and hard of hearing focus with part-time general education. So typically this looks at the percent of time they're in the gen ed and the percent of time that they're in a resource or self-contained classroom. And then you have some cross-categorical self-contained classrooms where you have students with varying disabilities. So again, there's a continuum. It's really based on the unique needs of your child. Where are they performing? Are they at grade level? Do they need additional support with math or reading? So again, I think it's just really working closely with your team to really, what is the least restrictive environment where your child is going to get the maximum support to reach their potential. And this can change. So it may, over time, you may have more support, and as the child develops and becomes building their language base, that you may see that shift. The other thing to look at is your present level of academic achievement or functional performance. A lot of times you'll hear this called the PLAF in the IEP, but it's the key to determining services and supports, looking at what are the needs of your child. It should be data-driven, and you're going to review the strengths and the challenges of your child. So with special education, you need to determine and look at the child's needs in order to determine what services and supports they will get. I encourage families. It's kind of challenging when you go into an IEP meeting or some of these meetings and you hear your child can't do this or this or this. But try and remember, this is the basis of how they get the services. Without a need, then you're not going to be able to get those services. So I think it's trying to get yourself in the framework of understanding how the special education system works, that it is more of a model where it looks at what your child needs. So, and then what we want to do is look at that progress over time. Is that gap closing or is it widening? And I think part of this process too is looking at what other areas can you target at home, that this is not just happening at school. These are the needs that are being identified, and this is what school is working on, but can I also work on this at home? So to extend the activities and support your child beyond the hours of schooling. So it's really important to be active and involved participant in your child's educational programming. You can also ask for a draft of the IEP or 504 plan or IFSP ahead of time, which enables you time to prepare a little bit and understand. Sometimes they do have a staffing. You can request a staffing to talk with the team to review some information so that you can be prepared as you head into these meetings. So the PLAF again determines the services by whom. It's going to look at the goals and the measurements, what are our objectives over the next course of the year, and looking at related services, accommodations that your child may need. So as we look at those accommodations and modifications, this is something that's based out of the Educational Audiology Handbook in 2012. Things that you want to consider are amplification options, communication accommodations, physical environment accommodations, instructional accommodations, curricular accommodations, evaluation modifications, and sometimes looking at are there additional needs for counseling or deaf and hard of hearing role models. So as we go into looking at hearing assistive technology, you'll hear people talk about CADS or the Classroom Audio Distribution System. You'll hear about total or portable hearing assistive technology, as well as personal assistive technology. So the first one, the CADS system, is often found in a lot of preschool, elementary, and sometimes in middle and high school classrooms. This is where there are speakers put into the classroom and then the teacher wears a microphone. It's really just to distribute the sound evenly in the classroom so that children in the back of the room get that equal access to the sound. And it also is helpful for the teacher with their voice. A portable or total is a smaller speaker that sometimes is a desktop that can sit on the child's desk, where the teacher again wears the microphone and the signal is sent to the speaker on the child's desk. The next one would be a personal hearing assistive device, or sometimes you hear it referred to as personal FM or personal DM. This is where the child either uses receivers that are directly booted into their hearing aid or cochlear implant, and then the teacher wears the microphone. And again, the reason for the personal FM is to help with challenges that may be associated with room reverberation, distance from the speaker, or background noise. So by the sound going right from the teacher's voice or the primary speaker's voice right to your child's cochlear implants or hearing aids helps eliminate those three areas. So it's giving them better access to the sound. In regards to personal FM or hearing assistive technology in general, I always put the caveat that the use is only as good as the care and training. And I think that that training must be ongoing, and you need to look at the individual's needs as well as the educational setting. Research tells us that use of hearing assistive technology is beneficial for children with hearing loss, but we also need to look at what's happening in the real world, talking about needs for daily listening check and verifying that the equipment is working properly. And I think this is some discussion that we may need with, pardon me, some discussion with who is providing those daily listening checks. And eventually the goal is to teach the child to be independent with their care and use. But again, this is scaffolding of learning. And I encourage you as parents to become involved in understanding the use of personal hearing assistive technology, how it works, because of what happens if the receivers come home by accident. Do you know what they are? Do you know what to do with them? So I think the more that we can work together as a team regarding training and care and use of these devices and troubleshooting is important. Communication accommodations are things looking at strategic seating, checking for comprehension, avoiding yes/no questions. The famous one is, can you hear me now? Sure. You're going to get a head shake or a yes, but you really want to know, are they comprehending what's being said? So asking, what are you supposed to do next? Or can you go get me the, so again, looking at comprehension and voting yes, no. Having teachers repeat or rephrase information when necessary, especially other students that are in the classroom. So if there's a student in the back of the room that your child is towards the front and may not hear, that teachers are repeating and rephrasing what the other children are saying. Educational interpreter such as ASL, sign English, cued, or oral transliterator, looking at reducing that background noise, and providing access to visual cues are all some accommodations that may be appropriate for your child. Physical environment accommodations may be looking at noise reduction, such as addition of carpeting, acoustic tiles, looking at curtains, specialized lighting, flashing fire alarms. When you look at instructional type accommodations, it might be use of visual supplements such as charts, word walls, providing children with listening breaks. Do they need extra time to complete assignments or a note taker? Use of closed captioning. There may be other modifications to the curriculum or assessments. You want to look at, especially now as we move into assessments that are being more computer-based, we want to ensure, are we really measuring the child's knowledge, or are we looking at their speech perception? So I encourage you to talk with your educational staff who is trained in working with children who are deaf and hard of hearing to look at that options. We may need to make accommodations for assessments in regards to using assistive technology so that you can patch directly from the computer right to the child's hearing aids or cochlear implants through the use of the FM and the direct audio input cable. They may need an accommodation where they have the assessment in a quiet room with the use of speakers, or have the directions read aloud to provide additional visual cues. Again, each child's different and what their needs are, and I would encourage you to talk to your staff and team regarding that. Because again, we want to make sure that we're accessing their knowledge of the material and not their speech perception and hearing ability. Some additional supports that can provide you with valuable information is the nationwide AG Bell. They do have a parent advocacy training program. It's a free online course. Again, the content focuses on Part B, or the IDEA, and how you're teaming to build that individualized education program. I encourage you to get online, and you can register for that for free. Also, Michigan AG Bell has another great resources. It's a great way for you to connect with other parents. They do social as well as advocacy and professional development. Hands and Voices, there's the national organization, and they provide the advocacy support and training program called ASTRA. It's a workshop format, and it usually partners with local or state agencies. And this year, Michigan Hands and Voices received a Carl's Foundation grant, so they're able to be a local host for the ASTRA program. They had one this past school year, and they'll be having a session again in the coming year, so I encourage you to check the website to learn more about that. Another resource is the National Center on Dispute Resolution in Special Education. They have a Michigan branch as well called Michigan Special Education Mediation Program, and this helps parents and educators and service providers develop productive relationships for resolving issues in early intervention and special education. Michigan Protection and Advocacy Services is another agency, and this is appointed by the governor of the state of Michigan to advocate and protect the legal rights of people with disabilities in Michigan. Michigan Alliance for Families is another great resource. It's not just for children with hearing loss, where Hands and Voices and A.G. Bell really provide focus on children with hearing loss. Michigan Alliance for Family is for all children, and again, looking at that birth through 26 years of age, and provides you with additional resources. They're all parent volunteers or parent staff who have children with unique needs, and provide telephone consult. They provide resources for you to access different things regarding your options as far as mediation or dispute resolution, more around advocacy. Michigan Department of Education Low Incident Outreach Program, MDE-LIO, provides educational materials and supports to services and families, working more with the visually impaired and children who are deaf and hard of hearing. Right now they're really active in doing some things with the changes in the state of Michigan with sign language interpreter qualifications, so you can find updated information on their website. There's a website called Success for Kids with Hearing Loss, has professional tab as well as a parent tab with great information on how to support your child's learning and social success. So navigating this special educational programming, it's a steep learning curve. I would encourage you to ask lots of questions. Emotions are real, but I would encourage you to try and focus on the facts. Collect and share data observations about your child with the educational team. And I think this is important because you may see things differently at home than what's seen at school. Going into the IEP or the IFSP, one of the first questions they ask parents are, what are your child's strengths? What are your child's challenges? And what are your goals for your child? So it's always helpful to probably write those down prior to and really think about that. What are your goals for your child, and what do you see are the areas of concerns, but where are their strengths, so that we can also build on their strengths. Following an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting, you might want to ask yourself, what worked well? What seemed to be challenging? What would I do differently next time? And then I would encourage you to follow up with your educational team in writing if needed, if you need further clarification of information, to do that and keep that communication open. Another resource to talk about, again, is U of M Sound Support and their school visit outreach. This is another thing for children in the state of Michigan with hearing loss, where you can get additional support. A staff member from U of M Sound Support Outreach can go out and do a classroom observation, can meet with the educational team to talk about recent assessments or review how a cochlear implant works, and just share information to try and, again, bridge that gap between the medical, educational, and family. Preferred way to contact to get more information about setting up a school visit or outreach visit would be to email David at photosoundsupportci@med.umich.edu, which is listed in the middle of the screen. I would like to thank you for your time and encourage you to jot down questions that you have, and I'm going to turn this back over to David. Thank you.
All right, good stuff. Thanks, Anita. So just a few housekeeping things to go over as you guys feel free to type in your questions in the questions pane. So just a reminder that we'll send out a post-course evaluation at the conclusion of today's webinar. So I will be sending that to your email address provided when you signed up for our webinars. So it'll come through our University of Michigan Qualtrics program. So it'll be an online evaluation that you can do. So we just ask that you take a few moments to provide us good feedback and suggestions, such as future topics, the format, time of day, etc. So we just ask that you take that time to help us out for future. So just as we had mentioned earlier, that today marks our last parent webinar of our summer series. So we just hope that you have enjoyed these, our first ever parent webinar series, and we hope that we can continue bringing these more in the upcoming months. So with that, we'll hold out for another 30 seconds here to see any questions that may pop up, but we'll come back here in a few seconds here. All right, so we're back with you. I don't see any questions popping up at this time, but obviously we have provided contact information for both myself and Dr. Barab. So if questions do pop up, feel free to send us an email and we'll be sure to follow up. So again, we'd just like to thank Anita for taking the time to present today, and for those of you logging in. Again, be on the lookout for the course evaluation, and we thank you in advance for taking the time to help us improve and bring you helpful and educational material. We look forward to future opportunities, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.